Mercy is important now to me because we have a period of history opening up before us where so many people are tempted to shrink and constrain the bounds of their kindness and compassion. Not from the world, but just to their nation. Not from their nation, but just to their race or party. Not from their race or party, but just to their little social media group. And to me, the essence of Jesus' message, the essence of the work of God in the world is to have the boundaries be broken, to have our circle of compassion and kindness get larger and larger and larger until we join God with a non-discriminatory love for all creation.
I think mercy is what calls forth our humanity, our deepest humanity, and connects us with a sacramental imagination, which awakens us, in my tradition, to the love of Christ. And I live in the United States, and there has never been a time in which our common humanity, the recognition of that, and an imaginative response that is more than partisanship has been more important. There's never been a time when that has been more important.
Mercy is an important thing to speak about at the moment because mercy can mean pity, or it can also mean gratitude. And when we look at the way that public language is going in policy, in international politics these days, there's a need for something old, something rich, something generous, and something accountable to be brought into it. And pity and gratitude might be some things that we need at the moment. So the quality of mercy is really relevant right now.
Welcome to St. Martin in the Fields. Welcome to the Quality of Mercy, the 2019 Autumn Lecture Series. We all make judgments. When we don't like them, we call them condemnation, and when we do like them, we call them a nicer word like discernment. But it's naive to say that we don't make judgments. And the truth is that social media makes judgments more instant, more sweeping, more universal, and more damaging than they once were. Justice requires that we make judgments, or people make judgments on our behalf. There can't be justice without judgment. And judgments give us power. And that power is invariably used negatively. So negatively and so widespread are those negative judgments that when somebody comes into church on a Sunday morning or comes into our office on a Tuesday morning and says, "You look nice," instantly we think, what do they want? Or, what do I look like on the other days that they've noticed me today? So whenever a judgment is expressed, we're immediately on our guard because we feel that actually, however nice it may sound, it's actually a form of manipulation or condemnation or negotiation. So in that context, mercy isn't about not judging. It's about using the power of judgment not to condemn or destroy, but to heal and to restore. Mercy sees judgment as the beginning of a relationship, not the end of one. In this series, we're going to be looking at the quality of mercy in a variety of genres, in literature, poetry, drama, social justice. And tonight, the quality of mercy in preaching. Why preaching? Well, preaching, as we all know, should be about grace and mercy. But too often, in 2,000 years of Christian preaching, it's been about judgment and condemnation. So tonight, the quality of mercy in preaching. We want, first of all, to thank our partners, Canterbury Press, who've helped us very generously in putting tonight together. The format will be that each of our speakers will preach a sermon, and each of those sermons will be preceded by Hannah reading a passage of Scripture on which the respective preachers will preach, different passage for each preacher. And then after everybody's finished, sometime towards 8 o'clock, it's your turn, and we'll have questions from the floor. And I'll explain how we'll do that when we get to that stage. Our three speakers tonight, it's a real treat to have them. We have, first of all, Brian McLaren. When we think about the church of the future, the first name that comes to our mind is Brian McLaren. There's possibly no speaker or writer who's given more of his life to thinking about the church of the future than Brian. Why is that significant? Well, because you know and I know that the great majority of people who talk about the church of the future are really mostly concerned with restoring a church of a real or imagined past. Brian's never fallen into that trap. He's opened our eyes, he's opened our ears, and he's opened our imaginations to what the Holy Spirit still has to give us. That's why we've asked him tonight. Anna Carter-Florence is a playful preacher who has given her life not so much to her own preaching, which she could well have done, and we would all as a church have profited from it, as you'll realize tonight. She, more than anything else, is a person who has given countless preachers their voice. She's given her life to teaching, preaching, to giving people the confidence and the imagination to embark on a lifetime of preaching. And Pádraig Tuama is a poet and a theologian and a person who's given much of his life to conflict resolution, having led the Corrymeela community for a number of years. He's a person whose preaching is poetry and whose poetry is preaching. Before I ask Hannah to read our first reading, please welcome our speakers.
The Gospel according to John, chapter 8, verses 1 to 11. Early in the morning, Jesus came again to the temple. All the people came to hear him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery. And making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Now what would you say?" They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again, he bowed down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away, one by one, beginning with the elders. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on do not sin again."
Good evening, everyone. Let me just make it clear. I'm going first tonight to set the bar really low so the other preachers will feel they just have nothing to worry about. And in fact, I'm not even really going to preach a sermon. You're going to preach a sermon with me. And I've found some people. Only one of these people have I ever met in my entire life, but they've graciously volunteered to help. And so can I ask them to come forward? Jess, Lissy, Steve, Jim, Sevilla, Francesco, Joao, Ada, and Donaha. So if you all could come forward, and if you will just make kind of a line right here. And these, can you just give an applause for these people who've been so kind? And of course, we're going to just give nothing but mercy and love and appreciation to these people. And I'm going to explain to you your job in just a minute. But what I need to do right now is I need to ask if you would go over on this side. And I need to ask if the next three of you would come right over here to the middle. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, that's good. All the way over here. And then two of you over here. Okay. Now, we're going to do a little experiment. If you would like a theological term for this, we're going to do something called an Ignatian reading of this text, which involves not listening to someone else talk about it, but entering imaginatively into the text itself. And there are four main characters in the text, but we're going to just focus on three of them to start. What I'd like to do is that actually we'll take, can I move you two just a bit over here? So this group over here represents the crowd. You three are the crowd, and I'll say something about that in a minute. Next, you... 1, 2, 3. I'm going to move you here. You three represent the scribes and the Pharisees. Now, you don't have to know too much about them except that they were like the religious leaders. So you want to put yourself in the place of priests and rabbis and imams, you know, the kind of people who have spiritual responsibility. If you're an academic, you think of religious scholars, but that's who you are. So you all are the crowd who's observing this. You all are the scribes. And then you three are each of you is taking the role of the woman in this story, okay? And I think it's fitting that we have a man imagine himself in that role, and two women in that role. Now, here's what I'd like each of you to do. I'd like you to choose one of these teams. So you're on the crowd team. If you consider yourself sort of, I'm just part of the crowd, you're here. If you would like to join the religious elite here, that would be great. And if you would like to join the woman here, that would be great. But have each of you identified with someone? Yes? Okay. So I'm going to just read the story. And right now, I'm going to ask all of you, but everyone here, I'm going to ask you to try to make the movie of this story in your mind. I'm going to ask you in a minute to close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that. You don't have to. But to try to see the story through the eyes of the people. So yours is the easiest in a way. You're the crowd who watches this all unfold. You have to be that group of scribes and Pharisees, and you have to imagine walking in. You're seeing through their eyes, and you have to try to see out of the eyes of the woman in this story. Does that make sense? And all of you will do the same. So if you are comfortable closing your eyes, you can do so. And I just want to begin. Early in the morning. So let's just picture from your eyes in this story that early light of the morning. Jesus came again to the temple. Being in a building like this, you could think of coming up the steps and coming into the columns. There'd be certain similarities. You're coming into the temple. All the people came to him. A crowd recognizes him. They assemble. That's my group over here. And he sat down and began to teach them. We should remember that in the ancient world, the teacher sat and the students stood. This kept people from falling asleep during lectures. So now we have the stage set. And if you can just for a moment see the scene. The women aren't even on the scene yet. The woman isn't on the scene yet. The scribes and Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, so let's stop there. Here's this moment. Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. What do you say? So if you could just for a moment say, at this moment in the story, you're watching it unfold. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What's running through your mind? And I'd like to start with the crowd. And I wonder if any of you who are willing, or all three of you, could just maybe come up to the microphone and just say, here's what I'm thinking or feeling at this moment in the story. And if you'll just come right up to one of these mics here. Can you come right up to the mic and speak right into that mic right there? Thanks.
Curiosity, apprehension, and sympathy.
Great. Some thoughts from you too?
I would like to know what was she doing, with whom, and then also pour her.
Good. Yes.
It's like quite dramatic, so I kind of want to know what's going to happen. Like in my head, I don't really have a sense of what the right answer is, and I'm wondering how these two are going to battle it out.
So just a sense of, I have no idea what's coming next. My scribes and Pharisees, could each of you just share, what are you thinking and feeling at this moment in this story? And please go right up to the mic.
I'm feeling rather confident. I observed her, and adultery is adultery.
I'm a bit anxious that people will wonder what I was doing to catch her in adultery in the first place.
Much less amusingly, I guess I'm thinking that the law of Moses should be upheld.
Great. And now, those of you who've imagined yourself in the woman's bare feet, I guess we can't say in her shoes, you imagine she's in the center of the stage, really. And could each of you share what would you be thinking or feeling at this moment? Right up at the mic, please.
I'm feeling terrified, and I'm wondering why it's any of these people's business what I was doing.
I'm also fearing for my life. I don't know what's going to happen next.
I'm desperate. I'm without hope and in need of grace.
Great. So we're going to go back to the story at this moment. The scribes and Pharisees said this to test him so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. So now we have to picture this scene. Jesus is kneeling down and he's writing in the dust. Let's start with the scribes and Pharisees. Let's hear from you. What are you thinking or feeling at this moment? First thing that comes to your mind is fine.
I guess, obviously, curiosity as to what he's going to write, and why is nobody looking at her anymore?
I'm feeling extremely confused. Sir, why are you not paying attention to what we have just shown you that was rather clear in the law?
I'm beginning to doubt myself.
The crowd, what are you thinking or feeling?
Curiosity. What on earth is he doing?
I'm thinking maybe he's deaf.
I think I'd be pretending to really know what's going on, being like, yes, of course he's going to write and work out the answer. He's going to look at all the different law and think about what's there and just nod confidently.
Good. And our last group, as the woman, you're watching him kneeling on the ground writing. What are you thinking?
What is this dude doing? I have no clue. I'm confused. I'm very confused.
Maybe there could be some hope.
I'm just kind of wanting him to get on with it. I want it over and done with.
Let's go back into the story. When they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Let's just pause at this moment. We've heard the stones falling to the ground. We've seen these men leave. And now we're at this moment, Jesus is still kneeling on the ground, and this woman is standing, and the crowd is still watching. Let's start with the woman. What are you feeling at this moment?
Like there might be some room for salvation in what's about to happen, or there might be some hope.
I think for the first time, hope. There might be something positive coming from this.
Still a little bit confused, but more hopeful.
So our scribes and Pharisees, you have left the scene now, and you're walking away. And as you're walking away, could you tell us what you're saying to yourself? What are you thinking?
I'm distinctly confused now. I thought this was my job. Clearly, the teacher has shown her mercy, and I don't know what I did wrong.
I'm not sure what I would do next time.
Even more self-conscious than I was when I started, I think.
And so you're members of the crowd. You've just watched this unfold. Could you just share what you're thinking or feeling at this moment?
I think there's some hope. I feel as though a door has been opened, and what I thought of as the law is perhaps there's something beyond that.
Thank you.
I'm sort of excited because all those teachers, they look always like they know best and they are much better than me, are being humiliated.
I think I'd be having like a crisis of confidence because the kind of where I thought the authority was and the power and all the answers were have now just left. It's not even like anyone said anything. They just deferred to this man drawing on the ground. So I think I'd be really anxious about who I look to for like moral guidance.
And the story ends, as we recall, Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." Well, we only have the woman left to hear from now. And what would you be feeling at this moment?
I think I'd be feeling numb because the most miraculous thing has just happened and it would be too much to process all in one go.
I think, well, I would still be trying to process stuff, but I would feel relief and joy. No one dared to throw a stone at me, so good.
I feel loved, and I cannot stop smiling.
Let me just ask you all to stay here for just another minute. But we're going to read through the story one more time, but this time I would like to bring in the fourth character from this story, which was Jesus. And I would like you to try to see this story unfolding as if you're looking out through the eyes of Jesus. Imagine, now if it's too easy for you to imagine yourself Jesus, we might be worried. But I would like all of us to do that and to try to see the story unfolding from his perspective. And so let's just listen once more. Early in the morning, Jesus came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" And let's just pause, and if you were Jesus looking at them and looking at this woman and looking at the crowd, what would you be feeling at this moment? And so now you kneel down and you're writing with your finger on the ground. You might ask yourself, if you were doing that, why would you be doing it? What would you be feeling as you were doing that, thinking as you were doing that? And you're there writing on the ground, and they're continuing to throw questions at you. And so now you stand up and you say to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And imagine yourself standing and making eye contact with all of those scribes and Pharisees. And I want you to think what you would be feeling at that moment. What thought would be going through your mind? And then you kneel back to the ground and you start writing again. Why might you be doing that? What would you be thinking at that moment? And then you hear the stones fall and you hear the feet shuffle away one by one, and you see that they've all left. And so you're Jesus kneeling on the ground, the woman is standing nearby, and now you stand up and face her eye to eye, and you say, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" What are you feeling at that moment? She said, "No one, sir." And then you say, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way. And from now on, do not sin again." Could we say thank you to these folks who helped all of us. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful. And Pádraig has graciously agreed to read a poem. Are you able to do that? Yes, or to give us a poem.
Magdalene, the Next Day, by Marie Howe. The world that would have gone on without me bargained and clattered, and I walked where I wanted, free of the pretense of family now, belonging to no one, back to the place where he'd bent and written in the dust. He was man among men. He knew not to look at them. Whatever he'd scribbled in the dust wasn't there anymore. But he was, standing with his friends in the shade of the temple wall.
Whatever we mean when we talk about mercy, I'm pretty sure you felt it at different points in engaging with that story. Thank you.
Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 to 14, and then chapter 2, verses 1 to 10. Reeds and the river. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal with them shrewdly, or they will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, Pithom and Ramnathes, for the Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites and made their lives bitter with hard surface, in mortar and brick, and every kind of field labor. They were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed on them. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river while her attendants walked by the river. She saw the basket amongst the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrews' children," she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses because, she said, "I drew him out of the water."
What a perfect story. Pharaoh makes chaos, mother makes ark. Princess finds baby, sister brokers deal. Baby saved, Pharaoh foiled. A perfect story. And great roles for girls, I might add. Not quite The Bible Meets Frozen, but almost. So before we get into it, I want you to notice two things. The first is that the main characters are young people and their parents aren't around. That's important because this is a story about what happens when the young people are in charge. The second is that without this story, without these two girls in the reeds, there is no Moses, there is no Exodus, there is no liberation for the people of God, and there won't be unless the parents get off the stage and the young people set things in motion. So you've got your two stock roles for girls here. Beautiful princess, responsible big sister. You can pick either one. They're both good parts. Even for you men listening out there, just use your imagination. You can be Pharaoh's daughter, clad in silks, dipping your lovely toes in the cool green water, or you can be Moses' sister, alone in the reeds, keeping watch over your basket by day and by night. You can be the powerful princess or the smart and resourceful sister. Like I said, you can't lose. They are both strong characters. And while the text doesn't tell us how old they were, whether they were 20-somethings or teenagers or even younger, what it does tell us is that each one of them had an inner radical just waiting to be unleashed. Each of them was ready to set aside what she should do and work together on what they might do, which is what happens when you're down in the reeds. I want to walk through some of the story with you. It's familiar to many of us, but you know how Scripture is. You hear it differently over time. So let's read it tonight the way the girls in the story lived it, as if the parents aren't around, which is an interesting interpretive lens, come to think of it. Read as if your parents aren't watching. A lot of people my age could stand to do that. So you know the context. We're in Egypt, a world superpower in those days, and the Hebrews are the Egyptians' slaves. But the Hebrew population is growing. It is big enough to make Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, feel threatened and worried that soon these people will be almost as numerous as his own. You're going to go downtown and hear Hebrew as much as you hear Egyptian. So Pharaoh comes up with a highly effective and unspeakably evil plan to control them. He targets the boys. Every Hebrew boy, baby that is born, Pharaoh orders his Egyptian citizens is to be exterminated on sight. Pitch them in the Nile. Pharaoh knows. Target the boys, and eventually you will destroy the entire population. Moses, of course, was a boy. And so his mother did what she could. She hid him for a while. But babies grow, and when she could not hide him anymore, we read in verse 3, Moses' mother, this daughter of Levi, does a priestly act. She takes a bunch of papyrus, loams it with the ancient equivalent of Kevlar, makes a snug little ark for her 3-month-old son. It's a brilliant act, a symbolic act designed to save life as well as to bear witness. And it is heartbreakingly limited. A Kevlar ark can't save a child for long. He has 1 day, maybe 2, before he will die of exposure. 1 day, maybe 2, to live. But anyone who finds him will get the mother's message loud and clear. This is what we have come to in Egypt. Take a look. Kevlar cradles. It is all I could do for my child. All I could give him was 2 more days. And with that, the mother leaves the scene. Maybe she was like Hagar, who couldn't bear to watch baby Ishmael die in the desert in the Genesis story. We don't know. But we do know it is the sister who takes over from here. That's what big sisters do. They watch when the parents leave. They report back. It may not be what they choose to do, but it's their job as part of the family. It was this sister's job. Stand at a distance and see what happens to your brother. Be the girl in the reeds and then come home. Verse 5, enter Pharaoh's daughter. She had a different agenda. She came down to the river to take a bath. She came down to get away from it all. The court, the publicity, the pressure, the pedestal. Being beautiful is a tough job, but that's what princesses are. Everything we dream we could be. It's their job as part of the family. It was this princess's job. Take your maids, go to the river, and anoint that lovely skin because we need you to look good this afternoon. Be the girl in the reeds, and then come home. So here they are. 2 girls in the reeds. 2 girls who know what they're supposed to do: hide and watch, bathe and dress, do as you're told, and come home. And they might have done it and never even met one another. But you know, the reeds are a watery, slippery, in-between sort of place. It's muddy and murky and hard to find your footing, and who knows where the deep water starts. Anything can happen down in the reeds to upset your balance, and on this day, something did. You know what it was. The princess found the baby. The Egyptian princess found the Hebrew baby. You know what she was supposed to do with it. So did she. So did the sister. And now what? What do you do with a baby in a basket when you're down at the reeds, at the river's edge, and the parents, your parents, are nowhere to be found? The princess knew what her father would have done, or at least what his law decreed. If this was a Hebrew male child, and it was, she was supposed to tip over the basket and let that baby tumble into the water. At the very least, she was supposed to close the lid, give the little ark a push, send it on down the river for someone else to deal with. That's what the law required, like it or not. And she was supposed to uphold it. The sister knew what her mother would have wanted. If someone found the baby, even if that someone was an Egyptian, the sister was supposed to keep watching, as awful as things might get. She was supposed to stay in her hiding place so she wasn't seen and she wasn't caught, and then report to her mother all that had happened. That's what times like these required, like it or not. And she was supposed to just try and survive. 2 girls in the reeds with a little body between them. They knew what their parents would have wanted. And you know what? They didn't do it. They couldn't. Things look different when you're down in the reeds. You have to think for yourself Look for yourself. Tell it like you see it, which is what the princess did. This, she said, must be one of the Hebrews' children. Sometimes the truth is the most radical thing you can say. Just to name it. What you see right in front of you, that body left for hours in the street. That baby left to die in a basket. Just telling the truth about it is huge, huge. Saying it out loud, letting it reverberate in the air. This must be one of the Hebrews' children because no other mothers are reduced to this, making little arks to float in the Nile, trying to save their babies from a flood of hate. One truth calls forth another, especially when you're down in the reeds. One girl, stammering out the truth about what she sees, invites another girl to speak up too. One girl, pausing over unspeakable evil, encourages another one to stand with her. This must be one of the Hebrews' children, said the princess, and then the sister got an idea. Do you want me to find a nurse among the Hebrew women? She said, stepping out from her hiding place. Do you want me to find someone to nurse that child for you? And just like that, they had a plan to save one life, no matter what their parents thought of it, and it was about the craziest plan you could think of, to take baby Moses back to his Hebrew mother for a few years, tell everyone it was just fine because it was on Pharaoh's daughter's orders. Really. But they did it, and they got away with it. And when Moses was 3 years old, the princess actually adopted him. She took him into the palace, and she raised him there with her father down the hall. And Lord only knows what he thought of this arrangement. Little Moses sitting in his booster seat at the royal table, riding his Toys R Us chariot through the throne room. Scripture never says a word about that. But as we said, this isn't a story about the parents and doing what they told you, even if your dad is the Pharaoh. This is a story about the young people doing whatever crazy thing they can dream up together to get the bodies out of the reeds. So now I'm wondering about you. I'm wondering what's going on in your community where you live in the autumn of a difficult year. You don't need an American in London to tell you that when my country is creating so much of the turmoil in this world. In my context, we are now talking about things we haven't wanted to talk about for years, hard things, like why do racism and white supremacy have such a grip on us? And what are we going to do about climate change and the millions of displaced persons? And how on earth are we going to have conversations without shutting each other down? When our political leaders, in my context, cannot engage in a civil discourse based upon facts that they can agree upon, how are we in the church going to step up and model truth and humanity at home and beyond our borders? How do you keep listening and talking and praying when you're down in the reeds in that muddy, slippery, in-between place that cannot sustain life? I think this story has some things to say about that. So what happens if we bring these two girls to the streets of London or the streets of Atlanta, where I live, and ask them to show us some new ways to be? Maybe one of the first things they'd say is what we've been picking up on all through this text. We don't have to read the world the way our parents read it. There'll come a day when we're down in the reeds and our parents aren't there, and we have to step up and decide for ourselves what we're going to do about this situation, this interruption, this baby in a basket, this child at the border, this black boy left in the street, this First Nations teenager, this Iraqi student detained at U.S. Customs, this body right here that matters. And if the way we've been told or taught to read the world tells us that it doesn't matter, that we can turn and walk away, then something has to change, and it's up to us. And maybe the second thing they'd say, these girls, is, if you're down in the reeds and you don't know what to do next, start by telling the truth about what you see. Sometimes that's the most radical thing you can do, just to tell the truth about that body in front of you, us, and especially when that body is not of your faith or race or country of origin, especially then. This is one of the Hebrews' children. The Pharaoh's daughter said that. This isn't an Egyptian. This is one of the Hebrews' children. Say it. Say it out loud, because one truth calls forth another. It calls forth mercy, and you never know who may be listening. You never know who may be waiting for a reason to come out from their hiding place, her hiding place, to stand with you and make a plan to save one life. And maybe the third thing they'd say, these two girls, is that this is how liberation starts. It starts, God's liberating work starts down in the reeds with an interruption we didn't expect and a body we've got to acknowledge. God's liberation of a people can start with two girls and one really crazy idea. That's it. That's all you need. Because whenever the children of God claim the freedom to reimagine and remix the world, well, then Moses can grow up. The exodus out of slavery can begin. And I tell you what, we all need to leave Egypt. It's the next chapter of a perfect story. And maybe you'll write it. Amen.
Luke chapter 1, verses 46 to 56. Mary's song of praise. And Mary said, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Saviour. For he has looked with favour on the lowliness of his servant. Surely from now on all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and to his descendants forever."
Good evening. Let's start off with two stories. Mary, the Mother of God, visited my mother once. My mother was filled with grief after the death of her own mother and was spending hours every day in bed. And she had spent hours every day in bed for a long time. There had been a long story of depression. My childhood is filled with the memory and the recognition that Mum's in bed. And years later, Mum told me that one afternoon she woke up because a strange woman had walked into her bedroom. And Mum knew immediately it was Mary, the Mother of God. And Mary came over and sat down on the bed. And Mum said, I felt the depression of the mattress where she sat down. And Mary looked at her and said, you've never liked me very much, have you? And my mother was filled with a confidence of ease and said, no. And Mary looked at her and said, that's okay. My little brother walked into the room. My mother looked away and looked back, and the star of the sea was gone. Relt na mara. No great transformation happened, but a small comfort of having been seen happened. We are here to talk about mercy. A friend of mine was fired recently from a job that he loves. He was fired because of discrimination. And the people who fired him because they prefer their discrimination to the possibility of repentance. He feels shamed. And we are here to talk about mercy. There's something that happens to a person when you feel shamed or marginalized. You see some things very clearly. Your pain, your struggle, the priorities that were going on, the impossibility of fighting against the tide of power that was out to get you. And we're here to talk about mercy. The testaments of the Bible are filled with people who are on the edge. When people are dispossessed or disinherited or discredited, they begin to realize things that before they hadn't realized. When you're exiled from something, when your circumstance or reputation are changed, you realize how fragile belonging can be, and you realize what the practice of love looks like. Maybe you're surprised by the kind of people who come alongside you, and you're shocked by the kind of people who cross the road before they'll see you. There's a gathering in of people who themselves also know what it's like to be on the edge. We are here to talk about mercy. Mercy comes from an old word. Sometimes the word mercy can mean pity. I know that I do not want my friend who's just been fired. He doesn't need any pity. Mercy can also mean thanks, just like in France. Merci. You hear it all the time. What do we have to thank the marginalized for? We are here to talk about merci. The kind of mercy we're going to talk about is not pity. Those who have had their lives removed from them and their safety removed from them are not in need of pity. I'd like to think about gratitude, because gratitude is an economy of reciprocal sharing. I'm grateful to somebody who's given me something because I didn't have it for myself and they gave it to me. They help me. They show me something. Maybe I deserve it, maybe I don't. But they give me something out of their generosity and capacity. What do we have to thank the marginalized for? Hagar was a woman who was found on the edges a few times. She, a daughter, it's thought, of a Pharaoh, came to be part of the caravan of Abraham because of Abraham's negotiations with her father, the Pharaoh. She's given as a slave girl and is taken in. She's given a new name to Hagar. Hagar is a title rather than her name. And there were deep hostilities between Hagar and her boss. It's funny how people in positions of power, like Sarah, can feel vulnerable, even in the face of also exploiting other people's actual vulnerabilities. So Sarah and Hagar do not get on. Sarah speaks with her husband Abraham, who listens to her and who sides with his wife. So Hagar began to practice running away. And on one time when she ran away, it says that the angel of the Lord went looking for her. It's a delicious piece of information, went looking for her. Surely be to God, an angel of the Lord would know where a person was. Not this angel of the Lord. Hagar was out in the wilderness, the literal margins. What is it that happens when we're hiding? We're filled, Winnicott says, with the desire both to hide and to be found. The knife edge of death and discovery. Hagar's life has been made worrisome because her bosses, or to name it for what it is, her owners, are listening to each other and are listening to their own deepest insecurities and comparison and pathological types of comparison. So Hagar's out in the wilderness, and the angel of the Lord is looking for her. And the angel finds her and asks her what's going on, and Hagar tells the story about what's going on, and the angel says, God has listened to you, and tells Hagar to return, and says to her that her desire for independence and for a name of her own will be met, eventually. The angel says to Hagar that God has heard her. It's a repeated word, shoah, in the Hebrew literature. And Hagar, because of this meeting, decides to make an offering to God. She doesn't kill a lamb for it because she was in need of eating a lamb, not sacrificing one. She decides that her offering to God is to give God a name. And she does this. She's the first person of any gender in Hebrew scriptures to do this. She gives God a name. And as I mentioned, the word listen has been an important word of power in this text up to now. So you'd think that the authors of the text are going to say, and she gave God the name of God who listens. But she doesn't. She gives God the name of God who sees. Because she's been seen and she's been found. And perhaps more than anything, she now has something that she sees. She sees hostility for what it is. She's no longer naive, if she ever was. And sometimes you can cope with things, even awful things, when you can give them a name. We're here to talk about mercy. And not mercy as pity. Hagar would not be helped by our pity. We're here to talk about mercy. And the mercy we're speaking of is the mercy of gratitude. Because Hagar gave God a name. And all of us who use names for gods are Hagar's daughters and sons. We are her offspring in a spirituality of giving God a name in the midst of the terrors of our life. There's a poem from the American poet Tuama about Hagar. The poet was so moved by a sculpture of Hagar in white marble that he wrote about the sculpture. And as a side note, the sculpture itself was carved by Edmonia Lewis in 1875. Edmonia Lewis was a woman whose mother was First Nations American, she was Ojibwe, and whose father was Afro-Haitian. He had been abducted by people who thought they could own other people. And her mother's land had been seized by those who thought you can steal land and still preach about virtue. So no wonder the sculptor, remember her name, Edmonia Lewis, turned to Hagar for her work. And no wonder the poet, remember his name, Tuama, turned to the sculpture for his work. African-American poet, he writes poems about surviving in a life that others want to destroy. And here's a little bit of the poem. The full poem is in your handout. I'm going to read from the line, "My God is the living God." Hagar in the wilderness. My God is the living God, God of the impertinent exile, an outcast who carved me into an outcast, carved by sheer and stony will to wander the desert in search of deliverance the way a mother hunts for her wayward child. God of each eye fixed to heaven, God of the fallen water jug, of all the hope a vessel holds before spilling to barren sand. God of flesh, hewn from earth and hammered beneath a will immaculate with the power to bear life from the lifeless like a well in a wasteland. We're here to talk about mercy and the kind of mercy that's filled with gratitude because Hagar didn't need our pity. Like the words of the poem, she needed raw truth and naming, and for that we're grateful to her. What she needed was to know that others saw that she had something to give. And a searching angel, when the searching angel found her, saw that Hagar had something to give. And so Hagar called that searching angel the God who sees. Blessed are those on the margins, for they might give God new names. Blessed are those with power, provided they use the power for names. The second person I want to speak about is the person whose poem has already been heard, Mary of Nazareth, who alone in all of humanity, chosen from the living and the dead, was chosen to be the Mother of God. Mary might have been 14. She might have been illiterate. She was engaged to be married to a man, Joseph, and she finds herself pregnant. The first thing she does is to rush to her cousin's house, an older woman, also pregnant. 2 women, one too unmarried to be pregnant properly, the other too old to be pregnant properly, finding sanctuary in the edges of each other. Many would look at their stories and see their stories in the light of the stories of women they always want to tell. And yet these women, in the company of each other, find a new way to tell a story that would be used for ill in the hands of other people. Mary is recorded, as we heard read, singing a song of magnificence. What does she do? Like all of us, she is one of the offspring of Hagar, and Mary gives God names. God, my Saviour, who looks with favour on lowliness, God whose mercy is for generation to generation, God of strength who scatters the proud, God who brings down the powerful from their thrones, God who lifts up the lowly, God who fills the hungry with good things, God who helps, God who remembers. Mary, like Hagar, gives God names in verbs. Looks, scatters, brings down, lifts up, fills, helps, remembers. God for her isn't abstract or obscure. God is shown in action, in verb. And in the midst of practicing this beautiful art of giving God new names from the vantage point of exclusion and being misunderstood, Mary also gives herself a new name. All generations will call me blessed. Mary and Hagar, sisters of each other in names given out and given in. Women on the edge of themselves, giving God new names and giving themselves the names that are filled with power, even though these are people whose power is being taken away. They make a future by saying something powerful in the present. We're here to talk about mercy. The kind of mercy that says to the marginalized, thank you. Not because your marginalization is a fairy story we can learn from, but because your gutsiness is gutsiness. The power you took, even in the face of having had your power taken away, is enough to make gods of us all who would otherwise have been forgotten. When I was younger, I was involved in a corner of Christianity that did not favor LGBTI people. To people like me who were gay or LGBTI, it was said to us, you have no love to give. And because I was very frightened, I stayed in that corner of Christianity for years. You have no love to give, somebody said to me in public once, and I believed it. I took it in like a name, and I looked for pity for being gay. Somebody else once said to me, do you realize that you are so stupid? And the same person said, and you're ugly. And I took it in like a name, and I looked for pity. I didn't need pity. I needed mercy. I needed someone to say, do something that will make us have something to thank you for rather than pity you. I needed some inner fortitude to give myself a new name and to name hate for what hate is. I was in need of my mothers, Hagar and Mary and Ruth and Bathsheba and Tamar, to coach me into the story of having a new name for myself, to reject the kind of pity that keeps terrible things true, and to baptize my life with change and protest and power and a new dawn. Who is it that will give us these names? The Mothers of Mercy. Whose is the name from which all names come? The Brothers of Gratitude. Where will our names come from? probably most from the time when our names are being denied. And what names will we give ourselves? Names of power, even when our power is being taken away. In whose name can we hope? The names given to God by the people on the edges. We are here to talk about mercy. The quality of mercy in preaching, to give God new names, to hear our own names, to be grateful what these new names teach us about power and belonging. Amen.